Hello, welcome to Secure the Continent and News Central Television. I am Gbenga Aborowa. This is the program where we bring you up to speed with all the security situations across the continent. But before we get into today's discussion, let's take a look at the top security headlines across Africa. President Vladimir Putin holds talks with South Sudan's leader, Salva Kiir. 1 dead, 11 injured in Goma Stadium explosion. Mali reports attacks on 3 military posts in the last 48 hours. Rebel attacks killed dozens of soldiers in southwest Niger. Don't go anywhere, I'll be right back. The death toll in a truck bomb explosion that targeted a security checkpoint in a residential area in the Somali town of Beledweyne has risen to 18. We have details for you in this intro package. Take a listen.
There seems to be no end in sight to the security travails in Somalia, as another truck explosion, believed to be sponsored by a terrorist organization, killed at least 18 people, left many injured, and at least 20 people in critical condition. The explosion, which happened in central Somali town, Beledweyne, targeted a security checkpoint in the area. Early suggestions point fingers to Al-Qaeda-sponsored terrorist group Al-Shabaab as the mastermind of the attack, as they take their savagery to the countryside months after being driven out of the Somali capital city, Mogadishu. Somali President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud had threatened to wipe out the Al-Shabaab terrorists, making the country unlivable, and the latest attack is seen as a response by the terrorists. Somalia has been bedeviled by security troubles for more than a decade, and in addition to its political instability, approaches to overcoming its most formidable enemy have been varied with governments. While the latest attack mirrors what the capital city, Mogadishu, has long been experiencing, a change of base to the smaller, relatively more peaceful parts of the country even raises more cause for concern. Somalia is a key presence in the Horn of Africa, with its security and stability of great importance. However, Al-Shabaab and the IS-linked ISIL have proven foremost detractors and distractions to the country's attempts at political and economic advancement. With chaos and trouble still lurking in Somalia, what is the way out of a situation threatening the rise of a blessed nation?
Now, joining me tonight and Secure the Continent to make sense of all of this is Mohamed Gabobe, Somali-American journalist. He joins us live from the Somali capital, Mogadishu. One welcome to you, Mohamed, and thanks for joining us and Secure the Continent tonight.
Thank you for having me on, Gbenga.
Now, Mohamed, what underlying factors have contributed to the deterioration of security in Beledweyne in Somalia, culminating in this tragic bomb explosion that we witnessed last Saturday? And just less than 24 hours ago, there was another terrorist attack in central Somalia that led to the loss of about 6 lives. What is the contributory factor to this?
This can be attributed to the current overall conflict taking place in the country at the moment. The Somali government has been facing serious setbacks on the battlefield in central Somalia at the hands of insurgents. This includes losing territory and as well as suffering heavy casualties on the battlefield. With the government setting these setbacks, it provides insurgent groups with opportunities to carry out more lethal attacks in central Somalia. But it isn't just limited to central Somalia. Even the capital, Mogadishu, as seen today, there was an explosion today in the Somali capital, Mogadishu, targeting a popular restaurant frequented by security officials.
Now, Mohamed, when Somali's president took office a year ago, Hassan Sheikh Mohammed, he did say that, defeating Al-Shabaab was top of its priority. And since then, the Somali government has been on an offensive against Al-Shabaab militants. You also have the African Union Transition Mission, ATMIS troops in Somalia, who are supported by American air power. How come, or two questions here, how is that offensive against Al-Shabaab going? And why is it that, I mean, with the superior firepower of the Somali National Army joined with African Union troops and also United States support, why haven't they been able to decisively end this insurgency by Al-Shabaab in Somalia?
Well, in regards to your first question, I believe there's a number of factors when it comes to why the government is, or how the war is really going. The government is currently facing a lot of setbacks. They lost control of several key towns over the past few weeks to insurgents. And this could be attributed to this overall situation in Somalia being very fluid. For instance, if the government has the upper hand today, the insurgents will have the upper hand tomorrow. There's always shifting dynamics, and you also have to bear in mind the local context of the war. Secondly, one of the main reasons why the Somali government and its international allies have not been able to defeat Shabaab is foreign intervention. Shabaab's rise to power in Somalia was a result of a US-backed Ethiopian invasion that took place around 15 years ago. Since then, there's been more foreign intervention, and that foreign intervention has only been fueling the insurgency.
Could you help me make sense of it? How is this foreign intervention fueling the insurgency? Are they getting support from external parties?
What I mean when I say how the foreign intervention is fueling the insurgency is that, I mean, Al-Shabaab in its early stages were a youth wing of the former Islamic Courts Union, but after the invasion, they became the poster child for resistance. And that invasion is what really empowered them. In the years that followed, more foreign intervention is the reason why Al-Shabaab is able to continue on fighting, because they believe that the country is being invaded and occupied by foreign powers, which includes neighboring countries and other international powers. So as long as you have foreign boots on the ground, Al-Shabaab will never lay down their arms. It has parallels with Afghanistan to an extent.
Now, Mohamed, the president of Somalia, Sheikh Hassan Mohamed, seems to be pursuing a military approach to defeating Al-Shabaab. And we do know that that this method is, we do know the tactics of Al-Shabaab is hit and run, hit soft targets. It's an asymmetrical type of warfare. Are there other approaches the Somali national government is pursuing in trying to bring an end to the attacks by this violent extremist group, Al-Shabaab? Are they considering negotiations or carrot and stick approach?
As of now, the Somali government has mainly focused on countering Shabaab through a military approach. But in order, if the government wants to get the upper hand in over Shabaab, it's not just going to be limited to a military approach. Because the only way you can actually get the upper hand over Shabaab is by winning hearts and minds, which the Somali government hasn't been able to do. Sure, they pushed Shabaab out of large areas in central Somalia, but once taking these areas, they haven't provided any services, security, and access, basic needs that the public really needs. So they haven't really provided any services. Without providing services and basic security, it'll be very difficult to win hearts and minds. Unlike Shabaab, the areas they govern, they're able to provide services to these communities, and most importantly, they're able to secure the well-being of the constituents that live in the areas they govern.
Now, this Al-Shabaab extremist group has been battling with the Somali central government in Mogadishu for more than a decade. How have they been able to sustain their operations? I'm talking about finances and also the recruitment. How have they been able to, get more foot soldiers and fighters in this battle against the coalition of the African Union troops and also Somali national government and international partners? What keeps them? What's their sustaining power?
Well, Al-Shabaab is starting off, they used to be an armed guerrilla movement, but over the years, they've evolved into a parallel government in Somalia, where they're able to sustain themselves financially by, by setting up a tax network where they tax different businesses, livestock, and a lot of other things of that nature. Unlike the Somali government, which, for instance, is heavily dependent on the international community, Shabab, on the other hand, is financially self-sufficient. In regards to their fighting force, it's, I would say, more of an ideological thing. A lot of people join Shabab based on ideologically, and there's also many people from marginalized and minority communities in the country that feel left out when it comes to the rest of Somali society. So a lot of them do go into the fold of Al-Shabaab.
Thank you, Mohamed. I'd like to bring a second guest into this conversation. It's also Mohamed Hussein is an independent political analyst. He joins us from Mogadishu in Somalia. Warm welcome to you, Mohamed Hussein, and thanks for joining us and Secure the Continent tonight. Now, Mohamed, we've witnessed a series of attacks by Al-Shabaab in the last 1 week. They seem to be on an offensive. Now, our focus this evening is on the truck bomb, on the bombing that happened in Beledweyne that claimed a number of lives. Given the absence of any immediate claim of responsibility, what are the key indicators or motives that experts are examining to identify the perpetrators behind this devastating truck bomb explosion? A lot of fingers are pointing to Al-Shabaab. Does this sort of attack carry the hallmarks of previous Al-Shabaab attacks?
Yeah, as you stated your questions, underlying factors which deteriorated security situation in Beledweyne, we need to look at different angles. Beledweyne is a city which been divided two sides, and there's a competition between clans in terms of political power, in terms of resources, and there's no common vision how that region and that city, whether they will be the part of Hirshabelle state or to be independent. The Shabab understood exactly the problem and the divisions that existed everywhere in Somalia, like other countries, like neighboring countries, the way they exploded, divided and ruled. So in order to achieve their political objectives. So that's the key issue. It's not security issue, is the rift and the division between the people lives that region. They don't have a common vision and a common interest, and they don't see they have common interest. Each tribes or each clans, they pursue their own interest. So that's basically the factors which contributed and the responsibilities. And there's no common administration and there's no common security. And you understand that if there's no common administration, there's no common security, there will be no security.
So who's responsible for this attack in Beledweyne?
Obviously, right now, as Al-Shabaab usually used to claim whatever they do some things, but this one they haven't claimed yet.
Okay, staying with you, Mohamed Hussein, staying with you, I just want to get your opinion on the fight against insurgency as promised by President Sheikh Mohamed when he assumed office in Mogadishu State House last year. He did say his priority was defeating Al-Shabaab. What's your assessment of his fight against Al-Shabaab terrorists in the last 1 year of his administration? How would you rate his performance, and what areas do you think the government needs to improve on?
This problem is in Somalia has been going last 17 years. The Somali government has goals. They had four goals. One was the country should be adopted federal system, should be finish the constitutions, should be democratized. And the fourth one is the fight against what they call extremists like Shabaab. So if you look at last 17 years, government has failed those four principles, which was nation buildings. And the reality, the reason is, for instance, Shabaab, fighting the Shabaab, the government relies heavily in terms of finance, in terms of training, in terms of equipment, in terms of logistics, in terms of ammunition, in terms of finance, foreign countries. So fighting the Al-Shabaab is not foreign policy. Other countries is a domestic policy. So what was the most important, what they lack in the leadership in Somalia the last 17 years, they lack is that they could not bring an alternative. This is the Shabaab problem, is not foreign policy the other countries, it's a domestic policy. So they never come the ideas and to pursue the interest in the Somali government and Somali people. They follow and was being given instructions, those who are helping the current government and the past previous governments. So unless they make their own initiatives, which based the interest and the reality and the values in the Somalis, in Somali context, I don't think Shabaab could be defeated current government in Somalia.
Thank you, Mohamed. Hussein, now I'd like to bring back Mohamed Gabobe into the conversation. Now, Mohamed, earlier you did talk about the government's approach to this, that, you know, Al-Shabaab seems to win the battle of hearts and minds. Now, my question to you is, how has the Somali central government in Mogadishu's counterterrorism strategies evolved in response to recurring attacks, and what specific measures are currently in place to attack the persistent threat of groups posed like Al-Shabaab's? Like Al-Shabaab, is the government tweaking its operations, or is just the same approach all through? You know, trying to get a military victory over Al-Shabaab?
When it comes to countering the insurgent group Al-Shabaab, the Somali government relies heavily on, they look at it from a militaristic approach. But in reality, when it comes to countering Al-Shabaab, the Somali government, they have to beat Al-Shabaab at their own game. For instance, like I stated earlier, Al-Shabaab tend to be financially self-sufficient. The Somali government, on the other hand, is heavily reliant on international powers. Even though, with that being said, the Somali government has issues with corruption in their ranks. A textbook example of that could be the watchdog Transparency International, in which Somalia has been ranked the most corrupt government in the world for the past 16 years. If you don't, tackle corruption within your ranks, if you don't focus on reconciling the society, if you don't focus on other approaches concocted by external powers, it's going to be very difficult to outmaneuver, let alone defeat, a homegrown group such as Al-Shabaab.
Now, staying with you, Mohamed Gabobe, Mohamed Hussein did say, Al-Shabaab is a domestic problem. And you also did talk about the over-reliance on international partners and, foreign help. Now, is that, no country is an island on its own. And I believe if help is coming from outside, it means a show of solidarity, and it should be seen as a positive thing. Why do you think this foreign intervention and foreign help has a negative connotations to it?
The reason I say that is because I feel like when it comes to counterterrorism or battling insurgents in general, the countries that are assisting Somalia, there's a lot of vested interest at play. For instance, the the international community will spend a lot of money propping up the African Union forces in the country. Sure, the AU forces are getting support because they're a UN-backed peacekeeping mission, but at the same time, Somali security forces won't even get a fraction of that support. So I do feel like, I mean, the Somali government does need assistance. They're not, financially self-sufficient. They're not, even when it comes to security, they're not able to take over security of the country at this current moment, based on the current realities on the ground. But at the same time, I do feel like they're just too dependent on international powers instead of looking at it from a grassroots Somali perspective. Because at the end of the day, the government forces that are fighting Al-Shabaab are Somalis. The Al-Shabaab fighters that are fighting government forces are Somali. So when it comes to an internal Somali issue, it should remain an internal Somali issue instead of internationalizing the conflict. And this is what foreign intervention has done in Somalia, and also the government's over dependency on foreign powers.
Thank you, Mohamed Gabobe. Mohamed Hussein, now let's talk about checkpoints. To gain a deeper understanding, could you explain the multifaceted role played by security checkpoints in the government's broader counterterrorism efforts? We've seen attacks happen numerous times at this checkpoints. What do you think about their effectiveness? Are they really effective?
His whole thing is a sham. The way was being founded, or the foundation of the Somali security sectors, it was not based the need and the security of the country. It was not built as a security forces in the country. It was built on fighting counter-insurgents. They're lacking. They're not conventional security sectors. They build the way what they were built was only to fight what you call war of terror. So they don't have the skills, they don't have the training, they don't have the mentalities, and they don't have the mindset of the countries like Nigeria or India or Pakistan army. So they were just, they carry light arms. And if you look at most of them, they're 80–90% they're illiterate. So you can understand. And that blame is not the Somali government. I think it's the people who are invested the last 17 years, the Somali army, and the way they funded and the way they build, it was completely wrong and was not really translated the way Somali countries needed.
Now, Mohamed Gabobe, are there significant concerns surrounding the safety and protection of civilians residing in areas where the government's forces are actively engaging with armed groups like Al-Shabaab? It seems like central Somalia is where the focus is at the moment. What steps are being taken by the government to mitigate this risk of collateral damage among civilians while they try to engage Al-Shabaab militants militarily?
As you know, in any conflict zone across the world, civilians are always caught up in the middle as a result of the war between the opposing sides. And honestly, Somalia is no different. When it comes to mitigating or trying to deter losses against the civilian populace, the Somali government, sure, they do claim that they're trying to avoid civilian casualties, but it's really hard to say because the places in central Somalia where the conflict is really active, independent journalists or humanitarians or independent or local NGOs cannot access those areas. So in all honesty, it's hard to say whether civilians are or aren't getting hurt.
Okay, thank you, Mohamed Gabobe. Now, Mohamed Hussein, before we go on a break, in the light of the recent attack, could you suggest a comprehensive set of actionable security measures that the Somali government should take to fortify the defenses and safeguard the welfare of vulnerable populations and regions similar to Beledweyne and other areas where we see active military engagement?
Yes, that's exactly. If you look at it and the security situation right now in that region, United State, including the capital city in Beledweyne, and really undermines the government and in terms of the security and in terms of politically. In terms of security, it shows that how vulnerable that the people, the population is, and it also shows that the government cannot protect for the civilians in that region and that city in Beledweyne. So that kills the confidence that that population, that area lives. They're going to have in the government, so because they cannot protect them. That's one of the messages the Shabab sent in. Second one is political. If you know that recent fighting since in August in 2002 until now, the government was Somali government military was fighting alongside with the clan militias. So the clan militias, they are the most effective now, combating or against Al-Shabaab. So they also politically undermines for the government, saying the clans that divided also, some who are really supporting the government, which and they are happy with united and against Al-Shabaab, and some of them, they were not really happy with it. So within tribes or the clans, there will be divisions. They show every day there's no security and the region has been insecure and a lot of people be killed. They will ask questions why we are part of the government since they cannot protect. So that also is in terms of their undermines those attacks. There's no in terms of security and in terms of political. So it's a very effective which Shabab are using the attacks and against this region.
Thank you, Mohamed Hussein. If you're just staying with us, this is Secure the Continent and News Central Television, and we've been discussing the security situation in Somalia following the truck bomb explosion in Beledweyne about 6 days ago. Do stay with us. We'll go on a quick break, and when we return, we'll x-ray the African Union Transition Mission in Somalia, ATMIS. The government of Somalia is asking it to delay its withdrawal mandate. What are the implications of this? And we'll be discussing this with our distinguished guest when we return after this quick timeout. Stay with us. Thank you for staying with us. This is Secure the Continent and News Central Television. If you're just joining us, we've been looking at the tragic bomb explosion in Somalia about 6 days ago in Beledweyne. But since then, there's been a series of attacks by militants. And joining me still on the program tonight is Mohamed Gabobe, a Somali-American journalist, joins us from the Somali capital, Mogadishu. We also have Mohamed Hussein, an independent political analyst, who's joining us from Mogadishu in Somalia. Gentlemen, thanks for staying with us. Now, I'll pick up at the second half with Mohamed Gabobe. We've seen the presence of the African Union Transition Mission troops in Somalia. They've been there for quite some time. And now there's a planned withdrawal of those troops because they can't stay in Somalia forever. What are the key security implications that have prompted the Somali federal government in Mogadishu to request a delay in the drawdown of ATMIS troops?
The reason why the Somali government is requesting a postponement of the second phase of the ATMIS withdrawal can be attributed to the Somali government has concerns that when the African Union forces pull out of these areas, if they're not able to cover these areas or defend these positions, especially knowing that the government is currently bogged down in central Somalia, there's a possibility that insurgents will take over these areas, leading to Al-Shabaab expanding its territory, which will put more pressure on the government forces.
Now, what's the guarantee, staying with you, what's the guarantee that, if it's slightly delayed, they will, the Somali National Army would have the competence and the expertise to, plug the leakages and hold fort and also prevent a vacuum? Why is there a timeline to this? And do you think, from your experience, that the Somali National Army is ready to take over from the African Union Transition Mission troops?
I mean, whether this postponement will work in the government's favor or not, I think only time will tell. But it also depends on how the government re-strategizes, how they make a blueprint and plan it out on how they expect to take over security. Because the problem with that Somali government forces have been facing, not just with this current government, but even in previous governments, is that they struggle to hold territory. So if the AU forces do continue withdrawing and the Somali government troops do take over responsibilities of areas vacated by the AU forces, it depends if they're able to hold territory. In June of this year, AU forces, I believe, withdrew from 5 or 6 locations in Somalia, and the government troops took over responsibilities. But there is a town called Girile in the Gilo region of Somalia, which days after Kenyan defense forces withdrew, Shabaab took over. And that town is only 12 kilometers from the Kenyan border, and it's currently in Shabaab's hands as of today. So it depends on whether the government forces can maintain control of territory that AU forces vacate.
Thank you, Mohamed Gabobe. Now, Mohamed Hussein, let's start with your evaluation of ADMI's troops' presence in Somalia. I mean, they were the United Nations Transition Mission in Somalia before metamorphosized into the African Union Transition Mission in Somalia. Now, looking at this body right from its inception, how much of a difference have they made in the war against terrorism in Somalia? How much of a useful partner have they been to the central government in Mogadishu? And will their departure from Somali territory leave a huge security vacuum when they eventually leave?
Yeah, it depends who you ask that question. When you look at the populations, they see that African Union forces, they're not doing the job they're supposed to do it, and they were happy to leave it. But when it comes in the government, they know they cannot exist without them. But let's go back and establish some factors which is underground right now, which reflected the reality of the ground. And if you are aware that April 2022, the previous government has signed an agreement with the African Union Forces, Amazon, to be changed the name of ADMIS, African Mission Transition in Somalia. And they set up timetable, which is drawn down until December 2002. They will be withdraw like 2,000. From December to June will be withdraw about 3,000 troops. But the current government has requested in the past to be delayed 6 months. And now they are asking 3 months also to be delayed, because they are guarding for the ADMIS forces. They are guarding for the installation for the government, including the presidential palace, parliamentary palace, and all the regional states, their compounds. That's the main jobs right now they're doing. But if you look at these transitions and why the government they signed, is not something based on the reality on the ground. Why I'm saying that? Because this came for donors' fatigue, and given the signals or political message, Somali political leaders we cannot continue to fund, and also the African Union forces, they cannot be here forever. These are not their countries, and the money we're funding this operation is not our countries. So act together, and that is the really reason came for ADMIS and withdraw timetables, which was not reality reflecting what's happened on the ground. So that's why the government right now, they asked twice to be delayed because they knew they cannot be existed. So it was political message were being sent in for the Somali leaders, which could not agree single things since it was established in 2004.
Now, staying with you, Mohamed Hussein, from what you've said, you seem to suggest that, you know, the ATMIS is only there to protect Somali government officials and, you know, the establishment and the elite. They're not working for ordinary Somalis. Having established that, what are the potential consequences of a premature withdrawal of ATMIS forces from Somalia, especially in terms of security gaps, away from the protection of government officials, government buildings, and the elite in Somali society?
As I say earlier on, withdraw for the ATMIS troops depends who you ask. When it comes to the government, whether the central federal government or the state, regional states government, definitely they protecting Amazon or ADMIS, whatever you call it now, they call it ADMIS. They're protecting that institutions. So that if they're not here, I don't think they will be existing longer. That is the reality. But when it comes to the population, Somali population, they believe it should be left because last 6-8 years, they were not part of fighting the Al-Shabaab. So they were just this is what they believe, the opinion, they just collecting the
but Mohamed Gabobe did, it raised a critical point earlier when I asked him a similar question and said, you know, Kenyan Defense Forces were at a town that is very close to the Kenyan border, and immediately they withdrew. Al-Shabaab came in. Are we not at the danger of replicating that sort of scenario if ATMIS withdraws from several towns and locations in the country?
I don't think so. I see different point of view for that. If you look at the ATMIS or Amazon before, they consisted in terms of the military, not police sanctions. They the countries which contributed, like Ethiopia, Kenya, Djibouti, Uganda, and Burundi. So if you look at those neighboring countries like Kenya and Ethiopia, they have their own interests, they have their own agenda. I think withdrawal will be affected only like Uganda and Burundi and Djibouti. Those forces right now in that region with the border with Kenyans there in Jubaland with the border, the Kenyan border with Somalia, Jubaland, that's where it's situated. Konfur Galpet is situated for the Ethiopian border. I believe the troops in those countries, they never live in the countries. I think only those three countries, as I mentioned, like Uganda, and Djibouti, and Burundi, may affect that. And those are the ones who are guarding the facilities in government, southern, central, and Somalia.
Now, Mohamed Gabobe, with the extension of the troop presence for an additional 3 months for ATMIS troops, what impact will the operational and budgetary aspects of ATMIS, the troop contributed countries, have on them? What sort of feelers are you getting from them? Are they tired, and do they also want their troops to, you know, leave Somali territory? Is there donor fatigue sort of situation with them?
To an extent, I think it could be attributed to donor fatigue. I mean, the international community has been funding the AU mission in Somalia since 2007. They spent billions of dollars, and Al-Shabaab is still not defeated as they wanted. So I do think they're kind of financially fatigued, and at the same time, I think international communities focus on a lot of other global issues. They can't keep focusing on Somalia forever, and they can't keep funding a foreign troop presence in Somalia forever. So I do think that's the main issue. When the Somali government requested a 90-day postponement, it still hasn't been approved yet, but it hasn't been denied either. It just depends on who is going to fund it, because the Somali government doesn't have the money to fund it, obviously. When these troop contributing nations are unlikely to pay it out of their own pockets. So it remains to be seen on whether it gets approved or not, because it's always tied to financing.
Thank you, Mohamed Gabobe. Now, Mohamed Hussein, you heard from Mohamed Gabobe did say that, and we all know, as a matter of fact, that charity begins at home, and the security of Somalia will definitely be the business of Somalians, and they will have to take care of their own security, as you've advocated earlier during the course of this program. Now, President Sheikh Mohamed has said that this offensive against Somalia, against Al-Shabaab militants in Somalia, is going to a second phase. The second phase of this offensive. What's your overall assessment of the security situation in Somalia as we speak today, particularly with regard to the government's offensive against Al-Shabaab? Are you happy with their strategies, or are there areas which you think could be tweaked so as to get positive results?
Yeah, if you look at Somali government, they have a binary things. They have to win the war. There's no another options, because the timetable has been set. Although they asked twice to be delayed, but at the end of the day, the foreign troops and funding and training, one day they will be living in Somalia. So they have to win the war. And Al-Shabaab strategy is to survive, because they know, as they say, there's a saying that foreigners, they have the time and we have the watch. So Shabab, they playing the game that to survive, and they knew one day they will, those foreign forces and funders, they will leave, and the government and the security forces cannot be defended. They will be defeated, and they take the seat of the government like Taliban. That's what they believe, Al-Shabaab. In terms of the government, to whether they're going to be successful or not, we need to look at in two areas. Number one is, if to conquer or to invade the land, to capture the land, it's not really important, and that's what's been happening last 15, 16 years. What is important is to hold that territory and to implement the government policies and the administrations. That is what we really, that area we need to look at. That's what we call successful. But if they could not hold and administrate that land they hold, in terms of, we know that the local clans and the tribes, they're deficient, they're divided. They always competed for the power and resources. And I don't know even how they could handle it. And the Somali problem always was division within the Somali tribes. Second thing is right now, government, there were, the operation is taking place 2 regions, Hirshabelle and Galmudug, which is the constitutions for the current president, Hassan Sheikh Mahamed. And the populations in terms of, and the state leaders in those regions and the central government and the population, they united, quite a portion of them, they united against the Shabab. But if you look at the other regions, which is Shabab strongholds, like Jubaland and Konfur Garbet states, which is not the constitution for the Hassan Sheikh Mahmoud, the other tribes lives over there. So, and in terms of, that there's election issues and those two regions existed over there. There's a political divisions, and there's the population lives over there. In terms of politically, in terms of military, they are not same as those two regions, and those two things we need to look at that, and that's what we can find out whether they will be successful current fighting and against Al-Shabaab in this government. That is really the indicators what we need to look at.
Very critical and important. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for your analysis and contribution to the program. Mohamed Gabobe, Somali-American journalist, and also Mohamed Hussein, independent political analyst, both joining from Mogadishu, Somalia. Thanks for your insights. We do appreciate it.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night. Now, to effectively address the Al-Shabaab threat and fill the security vacuum upon the withdrawal of ATMIS troops from Somalia, the Somali central government must pursue a multifaceted approach. Firstly, it should prioritize strengthening its own security forces through enhanced training, equipment, and coordination to take over responsibility for maintaining stability in the country. Concurrently, fostering inclusive political dialogue and reconciliation efforts with various Somali factions is also crucial to addressing root causes of conflict and diminish the appeal of extremist groups. Additionally, collaboration with neighboring countries and international partners to provide ongoing support, intelligence sharing, and regional security cooperation is essential in countering transnational threats posed by Al-Shabaab. Lastly, investment in socio-economic development, job creation, and governance reforms should be pursued to offer disillusioned youth an alternative to extremism and contribute to long-term stability. Thank you for watching Secure the Continent tonight. But remember to stay safe and alert at all times. I am Gbenga Aborowa. Bye-bye.